So we're going to have a look at measures of numerical measures, which means that we're going to be looking at the mean, mode, median and range for different types of data. Now you should have looked at this a little bit at GCSE. So we're going to see how we do this though in our graphical calculator. So we're not going to use the rules that we learnt at GCSE, we're going to see how the graphical calculator can work these out for us. The reason why we use the graphical calculator instead of working them out manually is that these are usually only worth 1 mark or a part of a larger question, and still you will only receive 1 mark for doing them, and doing them the old way takes a long time. So we're trying to save some time in the exam, so we use our graphical calculator to do it for us. So I've just cleared my calculator of everything that's in there. I'm now going to type in these numbers into my calculator. So we've got 16, 14, 27, 34, 12, 16, 19, 21, 23, 45, 41, 39, 23, 15, 23, 34, 39, 21, 18 and 17. It's always a good idea whenever you type something into your calculator that you double check that you have typed everything in there correctly, because after this we're going to just be writing down some numbers, and if we entered our data in incorrectly, then the numbers that we get won't be correct. There we go, I've just double checked all my numbers there. And you'll notice how even with this list here, I still put it into list 1. That's because this is one set of data, not 2 separate sets of data. So now we are going to be going into calc, and this is where we find all our numerical measures. So calc, and we need to tell our graphical calculator how we put the data in. So we need to go into set, and we need it to look like this. So we need it to say that we put our one variable into list 1, and that variable had no frequencies, and we do that by setting it so that this one here just says a 1. If it doesn't already say a 1, if you go down to it using the arrow keys here and then click the F1 button, it will change it to a 1. Now, like I was just saying, we only have one variable, which is the time it took to complete the maze, so we go into 1 var. And now we need to make sure that we're reading off the correct values. So for our first value, for the mode, we are going to have to scroll all the way down in our graphical calculator until we get to this line here that says mod. Now you'll notice how I've gone a little bit past where it says mod, so it sees this mod N1, mod F3, and that's because sometimes you'll have more than one mode appear in the graphical calculator, and you need to make sure that if there is more than one, that you write them all down. So here, here our mode is 23. Next, for the mean, so that was looking at mod in the calculator. For the mean, we're going to have to scroll back up in our calculator, right to the top, and it's this value here, x bar. Okay, so this x bar is our mean, and that's actually the symbol for the sample mean, and that's 24.85. For the median, I'm going to have to scroll back down again to where it says med. So median in the graphical calculator comes up as med, which is 22. Lastly, for the range, we want to look at the min x and the max x. And we do have to do a little bit of an extra calculation here, because if you remember from GCSE, the range is the biggest value, take away the smallest value, but we can just read them off the calculator. We don't have to try and find them in the list of data. So we're going to have 45 minus 12, which leaves us with 33. You should pause the video now and give the Now You Try a go. So hopefully you've paused the calculator and you've given the Now You Try a go. Now, in order to delete everything in your calculator, you could use the delete button here and click it multiple times. Or, like you saw at the beginning when I was clearing the calculator, you can click across here using F6 and use this delete all function, and then just click F1 for yes, and it'll delete everything in the list. You need to remember though to click the F6 button twice more to get it back to having our graph calc test intradist along the bottom, which is the functions that we need. So first of all, we need to type all these values into our first list. So that's 132, 142, 145, 133, 139, 135, 148, 153, 153, sorry, 130, 129, 141, 138, 143, 150, 144, 138, 140, 151, 133 and 137. And it's also a good idea once you're putting these into your calculator that you check that it lines up. We've got 20 pupils here and the last value lines up with 20. As I said before, you need to be checking that you typed it incorrectly. So we can see here, this one's been typed in incorrectly. That should be 133. There we go. Just checking back over the other values. That should be 144. 150, 143, 138, 141, 29, 30, 53, 48, 35, 39, 33, 45, 42, 32. There we go. I've just given them a quick check over. I don't know why it's double clicking sometimes when I'm typing in 44s and 33s. So then we go to calc again. If you haven't changed your settings in your graphical calculator, then it should still look like this and say list 1, 1. And then we again only have one variable. We're just looking at the pupils' estimations for the length of string. There we go. This time I'm going to enter them in a more sensible manner. I'm going to just work down the list. So the first value that I can see in my calculator is the mean, which remember is this X bar symbol, which is 140.05. If I scroll down a bit, my median is 139.5. That was looking at the median. Scroll down just a little bit more, I can see my max X and my min X. So my range is going to be 153 minus 129, which gives me 24. Remember that you can use the normal part of your calculator to work that out if you're struggling. And if we scroll down some more, we can see here, this time we actually have two modes. So this is what I was meaning before about making sure you can see the N and F bit so that then you can see how many you have. So the mod is 133 and 138. Both of those are the mode. So now we're going to have a look at how we would figure this out for frequency tables. So that first one was just having a look at a list of data. Now we're going to have a look at how we do it for a frequency table. So this time when we're entering our data, we're going to put the number of occurrences. Whoops, sorry, I've clicked on the wrong thing. The number of occurrences, so in this case the number of cherries, into list 1, and we're going to be putting our frequencies into list 2. So this time we are going to have numbers in the first two columns. Again, you can quickly delete all by going across to delete all function. So in the first list we're going to have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But if we have a look here, the 6 isn't a set number, okay? The 6 is saying greater than or equal to 6. Luckily, however, the frequencies for that are 0, which means that we can actually just ignore this end column altogether and just treat it as the number of cherries being from 0 up to 5. If we click across into our second list, remember we're going to put our frequencies in here. So that's 23, 45, 31, 8, 5, and 1. This time, still going into our calc, but we need to change our set to tell the calculator how we put our data in. So we put the number of occurrences, in this case the number of cherries, into our list 1, and we put the frequencies, how many of the fruit cakes had that amount of cherries, into list 2. So we need to tell the calculator where we put those. So if you go down to where it says frequency, we need to change that to say list, and then you need to tell it what list you put them into, and we put it into list 2, and then you need to click Exit. So then it looks like this, list 1, list 2. We still only have one variable though, which is the number of cherries, so we go into one var. Again, I'm going to work through the list in a sensible way just to save a bit of time. So our mean here is 1.38. Remember, for all of statistics, unless it specifies otherwise, you should be giving your answers to a minimum of 3 significant figures. If I carry on scrolling down, we can see our median, which is 1. Scroll down a bit more, we can see that the range is between 5 and 0, which gives us a range of 5. And lastly, for the mode, again making sure you've got the N and F on the screen, the mode is just 1. You should pause the video now and give the Now You try a go. So hopefully you've paused the video and given the Now You try a go. I've just been deleting the data from my calculator. Again, this time the number of Smarties is our observations. So we've got 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 or 18 Smarties. And the frequencies, the number of tubes that had those amount of Smarties, we're going to put in our list 2. 13, 14, 9, 7, 6, 5. And then we need to go into calc. Check that your set says list 1, list 2. And then we still only have one variable, which is the number of Smarties. So this gives us a mean of 14.9. Remember, a minimum of 3 significant figures. Scrolling down a bit more, our median is 14.5. Scrolling down a bit more, our range goes from 18 to 13, which gives us a range of 5. And the mode, making sure that you can see the N and F to make sure you can see all of the modes, is 14. Now we're going to have a look at grouped frequency tables. So for grouped frequency tables, the biggest difference between handling this is that we're going to have to find the midpoints when we're putting it into our calculator, because we can't put a range of values into our calculator. And we're going to have to use interpolation to find the median. What is interpolation though? Well, interpolation is when we're using the stats function in our calculator to for group frequency tables, the median just shows what the midpoint of the median interval is. However, we can improve that estimation by using interpolation. Where this comes from is that if you think about a cumulative frequency graph, so graph which looks like this, if we're saying that our median interval is this one here, then we can find a better estimate for the median by saying, well, the gradient between this point here and this point here is going to be the same as the gradient between this point here and this point here. So we're using the equivalent of the gradients to help us to find it. You don't need to know that off by heart though, you just need to know how to work with it. Now in A-level statistics, we are always using n+1 divided by 2 to find out what our median value is. We're going to have to start by filling out a cumulative frequency. So for this one here, it would be 20, 38, 61, 86 and 100. Always double check if you were told how many there were. We were here that there was 100, so I can tell that I've done my cumulative frequency correctly. If we're using n+1 divided by 2, that would be 100 plus 1 divided by 2, which gives us 50.5, which means my 50.5th piece of data is my median piece of data. So if I look down my cumulative frequencies, I only get up to 20 pieces of data by the end of the first group, 38 pieces of data by the end of the second group. However, I'm up to 61 by the end of the third group, which is too far, which means somewhere in this third interval, I am going to find my median. So this interval starts at 60 and ends at 70, and somewhere in there is my median, which I don't know the value of. For the number of pieces of data, we're starting at 38, we're ending at 61, and I'm looking for the 50.5th piece of data. Now we can put together the formula that's going to help us to do this. There's lots of different ways to do this though. I'm going to do it for x minus 60 divided by, and then in the bottom we're going to put the things that are in the same place, so 50.5 minus 38 equals 70 minus 60 divided by what's on the bottom of those two, 61 minus 38. To find out what this equates to, we could work it out manually, but we can just figure it out in our graphical calculator. We do this by going to Menu, down to Equation, and then going into Solver. We can then type in here exactly what we have here, and it will tell us what the estimate for the median is. So we do this by clicking on the fraction sign, and we'd have x minus 60. Remember to use the x theta t button here to represent your unknown, divided by 50.5 minus 38, across to get out of the fraction, shift and the decimal point for the equal sign, another fraction button, 70 minus 60 divided by 61 minus 38. You have to click the execute button twice for it to show us what the answer is. So for this question here, our median is 65.4. Now, as I said before, there's different ways of writing this. You could have your fractions like this, or they could be both flipped round, or they could be the opposite way around. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. So we're going to have a look at a full example on how we would find the modal interval, the estimate for the mean, and then we're going to have a look at interpolation again. So for the first two, we are going to have to find the midpoints of our intervals as we talked about previously. So I'm just going to add a column onto the left hand side here and put MP at the top, which represents midpoint. Now for the midpoint, you're looking for the value that's halfway between 55 and 60, which is 57.5. If you struggle to know what the midpoint is, if you go into the normal part of your graphical calculator, and we're wanting to do 55 plus 60, and then divide that by 2, and we get our 57.5. So that's an alternative way to do it if you struggle to figure it out just by looking at the numbers. You have to be careful that the intervals are staying the same, or if they are changing, don't just fall into a rhythm of writing down a certain set of numbers. Here, however, all the intervals are equal, so it will end up looking like this. We then want to go into the statistics part of our calculator, delete anything that we already have in there. And now, instead of putting this interval into our list 1, we are instead going to put our midpoints. So that's 57.5, 62.5, 67.5, 72.5, 77.5, and 82.5. In our list 2, just as we did with the normal frequency tables, not the group frequency tables, we're going to put our frequencies, which is 13, 22, 19, 17, 15, and 14. We're then going to go into our calc function, check our set again, and we need it to still look like this, because even though we were entering the midpoints, we still put those into list 1 and we still put the frequencies into list 2. So then we need to click on one var, because we still only have one variable, which is the angle in degrees. And our estimate for the mean is going to be 69.55. If I scroll down here, I can see that, as we talked about before, the median has just come up with the midpoint for the median group. You need to be careful that you do not write that down as your estimate for the median, because we need to use interpolation. But for the mode, it tells me the midpoint for the modal interval, and I can double check that by having a look at my frequencies. Yes, 22 is my biggest frequency. So the modal interval is this here, and I need to write it down exactly how it appears here. So that's going to be 60 is less than or equal to A is less than 65. For the median, remember that we're going to have to use interpolation, which starts off with us having to do a cumulative frequency. So I'm going to add that to the right hand side of my table. At the end of the first group, we have 13. At the end of the second group, we have 13 add 22, which is 35. At the end of the next group, we had 35 plus 19, which gives me 54. At the end of the next group, we have 54 plus 17, which gives me 71. At the end of the next group, we've got 71 plus 15, which gives me 86. And at the end of the last group, we get up to 100. And remember that you can double check in the question, did it tell me how many I had? In this case, it did. We had 100 again. And that's how I know that this is the right number. For what piece of data we're going to be looking at, remember that we do whatever the maximum number here is, plus 1 divided by 2, which happens to give me 50.5 again. Next, we're looking through our values here, and we're going to look for where it changes from being below 50.5 to above 50.5. So at the end of the first group, we only have 13. At the end of the second group, we have 35. And at the end of the third group, we're up to 54. So we know that somewhere in this group here, I'm going to have my median value. So we're going to have to draw our line. The interval starts at 65, it ends at 70, and somewhere in there is my median value. For how many pieces of data we have 35 at the beginning of the interval, we have 54 by the end of the interval, and my median piece of data is 50.5, so that goes in the middle there. So now I'm going to use the same way as I did before. I'm going to do x minus 65 divided by 50.5 minus 35 is equal to 70 minus 65, sorry, divided by 54 minus 35. And remember that then we have to go into equation, solver. You can delete anything that's already in there to make it easier to type in. Remember to use the x theta t button for your x value, minus 65 divided by 50.5 minus 35, shift and the decimal point for equals. Click across to get out the fraction, shift and then the decimal point for equals. 70 minus 65 divided by 54 minus 35. Remember that you have to click XE twice, and that gives us an estimate for our median of 69.1. You should now take this opportunity to pause the video and try the Now You Try question. Okay, so hopefully you've given the Now You Try question a go. Remember to start off with, I'm just going to cross this out because we got rid of this. You could talk about the maximum possible range and the minimum possible range, but we're not going to in this video. So we're going to have a look here at finding the modal interval, the estimate for the median and the estimate for the mean. So remember to start off with, we're going to find our midpoints, which in this case are going to be 3, 4.5, 5.5, 7, 9.5, 13. Okay, and I was just doing in my head the 2 plus 4 is 6, 6 divided by 2 is 3, 4 plus 5 is 9, 9 divided by 2 is 4.5, 5 plus 6 is 11, 11 divided by 2 is 5.5, and so on. So then we're going to type those into the list 1 in our calculator. So that's 3, 4.5, 5.5, 7, 9.5, and 13. Into list 2, we're going to type our frequencies. That's 15, 9, 6, 24, 14, and 12. Then we need to go into calc, check that our set says list 1, list 2, and go into one variable. So the estimate for the mean is 7.19 to 3 significant figures. Remember not to write down the median from the graphical calculator. We're going to work that out using interpolation. But we can see here that the mode is 7, and we can see again, the group that has 7 as the midpoint is the one with the highest frequency. But remember that we're writing down the interval, which means that we need to write down exactly what it says here, which is 6 is less than or equal to A, which is less than 8. Now for the median, we need to do a cumulative frequency. I'm going to add that onto the right hand side. So that's going to be 15, 24, 30, 54, 68, 80. And again, we can double check, yes, that matches up with what I was told in the question. You won't always be told it in the question, but quite a lot of the times it does tell you. Remember to decide what your median piece of data is. You do the value here, which this time is 80, plus 1 divided by 2, which gives us 40.5 this time. So we're going to go through our data until we get past 40.5. So at the end of the first group we have 15, at the end of the second group we have 24, at the end of the third group we have 30, and at the end of the fourth group we're up to 54, which is too far, which means that somewhere in there we have our median. So we're going to draw our line. We're starting at 6, going up to 8, and somewhere in there is my median, which I don't know. For the pieces of data, we're starting at 30 pieces of data, we're ending at 54 pieces of data, and I'm looking for the 40.5th piece of data. So then we need to make our fractions. We're going to have x minus 6 divided by 40.5 minus 30 equals 8 minus 6 divided by 54 minus 30. Then we're going to put that into our equation part of our calculator. Solver, delete anything you already have in there. And we're going to have x minus 6 divided by 40.5 minus 30 equals 8 minus 6 divided by 54 minus 30, and that gives us a median of 6.875. There is another Now You Try question that you could give a go. However, it is very similar to the one that we were just looking at, and again for the next one. Okay, so there's plenty there that you can give a try. You just have to be careful and make sure that all of these have it so that the intervals end at the same point as the next one begins, which they do. I am going to make a separate video which talks about how we would do this if our data was discrete. We're also going to have a look next time at finding the population, standard and sample, standard deviation and variance using the graphical calculator. Thank you very much for listening.